If you bend or break a sword, is it crap? Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So I'm making a quick off-the-cuff video here in my very cold, below freezing garage because I was inspired by a comment that was made underneath a recent upload that I put on the channel where someone commented that a certain model of sword, a certain make, brand of sword, had bent and broken on someone else's YouTube channel. And I'm not going to name the model of sword, I'm not going to name the channel necessarily because it's not important for the purposes of this video. But the basic point is that if a person bends or breaks a sword in a video on YouTube, does that mean that that sword is crap, and does it mean that the manufacturer is crap? Well, fundamentally no, we can't make that conclusion simply from that fact. For all of you who have watched numerous tests of swords on YouTube, could be any kind of sword, could be anything from a katana to a Chinese jian to a European longsword or a side sword or a rapier, whatever. The fact is that the tests we put them through are varying, very, very different, very, very diverse, and we are ourselves diverse as well, different skill levels. There's also luck in terms of what we physically do with the sword, and also luck in terms of the manufacturing of the sword. Now, the simple fact is that, yes, generally speaking, higher-end manufacturers are going to have more consistent production, quality control, essentially. And if we're going for more budget and also certain types of sword, we're more likely to experience failure. Now, that's not something which I want to deny. I'm not here to say that, yep, indeed, if you're buying a very high-end sword from a certain manufacturer, it's far less likely to fail on you than if you're buying a low-end sword from eBay. So yeah, quite simply, that is true. But we've got to put things in context as well in terms of what you're actually physically doing to the sword. Now, many of you will know on my channel that I cut green wood. And now, green wood is a fairly tough target. I justify this by virtue of the fact that I don't think it's an unreasonable historical target. We know that it was done historically. It's mentioned in at least one text, in a European text, saying that swords were tested on lumber and animals, whereas elsewhere people tested their swords on flesh, on bodies. This is referring to Japan. But the fact is that in the modern world, what most people test cut with are tatami mats, water bottles, pool noodles, and indeed, like me, certain types of green wood, including bamboo. I would love to cut green bamboo, but in the United Kingdom it's very difficult to get hold of green bamboo that is any bigger than about that diameter, so not really useful for me. So I use certain types of green wood. Now, this is a tough target, but I think it's justifiable and excusable by the fact that if you're cutting through bone, that's actually quite similar to green wood. And also, a lot of swords are going to encounter things like shield rims, helmets, spear shafts, other swords. So they are going to meet targets in normal combat use, which are definitely as tough or tougher than green wood is. And obviously there's a question about how thick you go, and obviously if I'm chopping it into an oak tree, that's somewhat different to chopping through a holly branch that's that big. But we also have to talk about sword type, okay? So if I grab this jian from LK Chen, now this is a narrow blade. It is clearly not designed for cleaving. This is very similar in Europe. This would probably be classified as a rapier blade, and I've talked about that in a previous video. For this very sword, in fact. Now, quite simply, I am not going to go and try and cleave through greenwood branches with this sword. What do I think would happen if I do? Well, the sword is most likely, in this case, I know LK Chen's swords pretty well, it's most likely to bend. And is that a failure? No, actually. I would prefer it to bend than to break, because I can straighten a bent blade. So it's not a failure, it's actually exactly what I would expect that sword to do if I mash the blade into, even with perfect edge alignment, into a very thick wooden branch that this is never going to be able to cleave through. And at some point the momentum is going to stop, and it's probably going to twist slightly, and at that point it's going to bend. So even if you could make some massive great machine which kept perfect edge alignment and didn't allow it to bend in either direction, that energy's got to go somewhere. And so what's going to happen actually is you do get flexing in a blade. People always think about flexing in the plane of the flat, but you do actually get flexing in the plane of the edges as well, and potentially that's when a blade can snap. Because of the cross-section of the blade is not designed to flex in that direction or bend in that direction, and so you end up with a fracture. So, I don't think that it would be a failure if I were to abuse this to the point that it broke. It is, at the end of the day, and this is true of any sword from any manufacturer. I could grab an Albion bastard sword. So everyone recognises that Albion are pretty high-end and pretty reliable, good steel, you know, all this kind of stuff. But there are YouTube channels out there that have chipped, bent and broken Albions. You can do it. I could do it easily. If I wanted to break this sword right now, I could bend it right in front of your eyes by grabbing it here, putting my knee in the blade and pushing and pulling as hard as I can, and I will bend this blade. It is a bar of steel. Yes, it's hardened and tempered. Yes, it is a spring to a certain point. But if you bend a spring beyond its springiness, then it will bend or break. Okay. Equally, if we go over to a differentially hardened blade that is not a spring, Swords of Norcia, differentially hardened, edge-quenched blade. If I do the same thing with this, even more easily, I can bend it over my knee. Okay, which I'm not going to do. But as a weapon, it is a sharpened bar of steel, and it doesn't matter whether it's an edge-quenched blade or whether it's a through hardened and tempered blade, spring blade. It will at some point bend and then break, or it will just break if you put it through the right abusive conditions. So, the fact is this happens to weapons. And it also happens to other weapons. It happens to poleaxe shafts. That's why they're built with very beefy langets on them. I've known numerous poleaxes to break, actually. Spears can break. Everything can break, okay? So you can't have an indestructible weapon. So just because someone has taken a sword and they have cut badly, or they've cut abusive targets, or they've done whatever, and they have chipped an edge, or they've bent a blade, or they've broken a blade, it does not mean that that sword was deficient. It just means that the test was either just too much for that particular sword to handle, or the person didn't apply the right skills, they messed up, they did it badly, they did a bad cut. You can break swords like that. They do break, I'm afraid. You have to just accept that that's a reality. The final thing I want to say is historical correctness. Okay? Now, we for the most part, we try to replicate swords. Okay? We try to make things that are like things from the past. So most of the katanas, most of the semi-decent katanas on the market today have an edge quenched, they have a hamon and they have differential hardening. And swords, some swords have a through temper and are springy, but they will also have be hardened such that they're harder at the edge and this kind of stuff. But we have to accept that modern steel and modern heat treatment is better than was available to most people in historical periods. There are some exceptions. So a sword from 14th century Japan is going to be better metallurgically, probably, than this modern 1095 steel blade, because this is a mass-produced item made relatively cheaply, and a sword that is made out of Tamahagane steel, very, very high quality, and then tested as well and lasted for centuries and generations, is probably going to be slightly better quality. It's going to be harder at the edge and that kind of stuff. But for a lot of swords, this Albion sword is going to be better steel and better heat treatment than probably 95% of European longswords that were ever made. So you have to take everything I've said previously about modern replica swords, the fact that yes, you can bend them, yes, you can break them under the right conditions, and it's going to happen, but compared to their historical counterparts, you'll be able to break and bend the historical swords even more easily, because the simple fact is that we're dealing with better heat treatment and better steel, more homogeneous steel, more uniform now than we were historically in previous periods. So, just accept that swords do bend, do break under the right conditions. Just because you have seen someone on YouTube break or bend a sword doesn't mean that that particular model is bad, doesn't mean that that manufacturer is bad. It just means that that person did a thing with that particular example of that particular sword that resulted in it bending or breaking. And you need to look at the details to find out whether that gives you any more useful information about that manufacturer or that particular style of sword or whatever. I hope this is useful. Your comments are always interesting to me, so post below. Let me know about your experiences, your thoughts on this topic. If you know any funny videos of people breaking swords in silly ways, then I'm always happy to watch those. And I'll see you again on the channel. Give us a like. Please subscribe if you haven't done already and click that notification bell. And I'll see you soon. Cheers, folks.
Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.